Intercultural communicative competence is essentially where and how culture and language come together and meet. It's a set of competencies that a learner needs to become proficient at in order to have intercultural interactions. The first competency would be attitudes, understanding the attitudes and behaviors from each culture because they differ. Knowledge about that culture and that language, being able to interpret the behaviors and language of another culture, but also being able to relate to it. Learning the skill of discovery and interaction, meaning being curious and learning about another culture and their language, and also how to proficiently interact with one another. And it also includes cultural awareness and cultural education. Essentially, ICC is seeing relationships among cultures that are different from our own instead of just seeing the differences. For example, during my undergraduate, I volunteered at the local YMCA with refugee swimmers. So these students didn't know how to swim. They were almost all from Syria, and they were refugees from a war-torn country. And they'd had a lot of traumas, and one of the things that the area was doing was providing swimming lessons, both for the knowledge of swimming, but also as an outlet for the trauma that they experienced. What was interesting was when they were in the refugee camp, a lot of the boys started to learn English and they started to learn how to swim, but the girls did not. They were supposed to just stay in the area that they were living in. So one of the things that we worked on was understanding the attitudes and behaviors of our cultures, learning about each other's cultures, and then being aware of the differences in our cultures, but then also the similarities in our culture, and how does that allow us to relate to one another. Transnational language culture is essentially where language and culture transcend national boundaries. It is more individualized than just a group as a whole or culture as a whole, and it develops across a lifetime. It's not stagnant, it's not static, but it develops and it grows as the person grows because it is uniquely tied to each individual. Synchronous computer-mediated communication, or SCMC, is pragmatic experimentation, taking the time to reflect upon the interactions, and then written chats. So it has been found that within translanguaging and intercultural communication and transnational communication, a written chat versus writing or speaking out loud can decrease the cognitive load. Asynchronous computer-mediated communication examples would be blogs and taking the time to learn cultural awareness. If you're learning about another culture, you're teaching a student that is from another culture, taking the time to be aware of the nuances of that culture. And then multi-user virtual environments and mobile augmented reality games can provide meaningful engagement opportunities for students and give opportunities to express and interpret meaning within language and culture. Digital literacies can increase communication, and some examples of digital literacies that were provided in our readings this week were social networking, podcasts, blogs, vlogs, animations, infographics, video games, virtual realities, and augmented realities. While reading the Digital Stories article, I learned that digital stories can increase meaning making for students, increase complex communication, increase student critical thinking, increase understanding of digital designs, increase linguistics, and increase a link to identity, interests, experiences, and learning. I had an experience with using digital stories in a kindergarten classroom, so it was a little bit different than a typical digital story because it was with 5 and 6-year-olds. But what we did as part of an introduction was to create these digital stories for the students. So the students and their parents worked together on um, things that the student was interested in and writing that down or having pictures. And then we would interview the students as well, and they would tell us about their life and their background and their family and who their family consisted of, because that's different for everybody. Um, and we had some students that were from Africa that had been refugees. We had students that were from Afghanistan and Pakistan. And then we had students just from other countries whose families had either lived in another country because of the military or jobs, or they had chosen to move to the United States. Um, and we were able to create essentially a digital story on a PowerPoint, and the students' information would be put up there, but we wouldn't put their name. And then we would show it at the end of the day, and we would show one each day, and for the first like 20 days. And the students got to learn about one of their classmates. They were able to discuss with one another who they thought it was and why. And we were working on, like, I know this because, or I wonder this because. So they would work on, I wonder if it's this student because, and have a reason behind their thinking. They began to critically think about what they knew about each of their individual classmates and peers. They worked on language skills, linguistic skills, and all of these digital stories were linked to each student's identity and their interests and their life experiences. So this was a fun way to include technology and include student stories. And again, it was a little bit different than a typical one because it was with such young students, but it was a way for students to share who they are and then for other students to learn about their peers.